There's new rules for a Zangor Heavy Thousand Suns army out, but it seems like you might be giving up a lot of your most important psychic toys to make it happen. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought we'd take a look at some new Thousand Suns rules. These ones were teased a little while back by Games Workshop, an army of renown coming from Warzone Nachmund Rift War, which basically gives you the ability to field an entire horde of Zangors, and a few other special rules to try and make that a little bit more of a tempting prospect. Currently in 40k, Thousand Suns were kind of a bit mid-tier I would say, but have received a fairly powerful boost from the Armour of Contempt special rule, in particular making their Terminators truly obnoxious to shift. The change perhaps put Zangors at even worse of a position than they were before, and that was already kind of niche. Just the raw damage and defense that they have for their points cost really isn't all that impressive, so if you're going to be building an army around them, then it needs to have some pretty significant buffs to make that worthwhile. The formation that they've got for this is called the Warpmeld Pact, and it is kind of fun in the lore, basically a Thousand Suns force that's focused on warping, mutating and corrupting those around them, creating a vast amount of Zangors, Spawn, and other warp-mutated horrors. Basically Thousand Suns where their creations are in the foreground and the actual Marines and Sorcerers are kind of in the background. Certainly a bit of a niche way to play Thousand Suns, and not perhaps what a lot of people are drawn to the faction for. But if you do happen to have bought multiple copies of the Combat Patrol box, and you've got loads and loads of Zangors going round, then the rules might be a bit more interesting. The general theme with Armies of Renown is that you have to give up a fair few options within the Codex to unlock some interesting options for the things that remain, but the Warpmeld Pact does seem to be one of the most punitive lists of things that you can't take out of just about any of these. First up, you give up named characters, so Araman and Magnus there. Magnus isn't particularly strong at the moment, though Araman is very useful. Kind of a shame to have to leave him at home. The army must be a pure Thousand Suns army, so no mixing it with other demons or anything like that. Perhaps not what you really want to do due to Kabbalistic rituals anyway, but it does deny even a few more options. Next, and a really big one, is that you can't use any vehicles, demon units or cultists. No vehicles is pretty painful, not being able to use long-range fire support like Contempt Dreadnoughts or Forge Fiends. No demons means that you can't take a Thousand Suns Demon Prince, which seems like a bit of a shame really, as he kind of fits with the mutated Thousand Suns vibe kind of well. And no cultists means that you don't have access to your cheapest unit of chaff infantry. You really do have to rely on Zangors even for more backfield duties that cultists might have done fine for. Next, and again very painful, is losing the discipline of Vengeance. Thousand Suns have two disciplines, Change and Vengeance, and you're going to lose access to some really quite important powers in that. You won't be able to remove invul saves with Twist of Hate. You won't be able to get +1 to hit with Presage, and perhaps worst of all, you won't be able to use Temporal Surge, the one that allows you to double move infantry or beasts, which would actually be really quite handy for making Zangors and Spawn work, as it means that their charge threat range is massively bigger. The changed ones are still good, but you are losing access to a bunch of powerful stuff. Next, you must include more Bray units than the total units of Rubrics or Scarabs. I guess if you're taking this formation, that's kind of likely to happen anyway. Bray units are basically the standard Zangor troops choice, not the Enlightened, so it does mean that you're going to have a decent number of the standard Zangors in the army. Finally, and again removing another powerful advantage of the Thousand Suns, you don't get in the Brotherhood of Sorcerers special rule, the one that gives the 5+ invul and +1 to cast psychic powers. You still get the 5+ invul on a bunch of key units, though not the Terminators or the Rubrics, and the +1 to cast is traded out for other bonuses. To be fair, the loss of the 5+ invul really isn't the biggest deal on Rubrics and Terminators anymore. You do have to hit them with some very high AP weapons to actually trigger it, now Armour of Contempt is a thing. Obviously that's a massive amount of trade outs, so the benefits that you get have to be really good to outweigh that. First up, you get access to a Warlord trait Relic and Kabbalistic Ritual, and then 7 additional stratagems that we'll go over in a second. Generally though, as you'd expect, they are mainly for supporting Zangor units. Next, in place of the Brotherhood of Sorcerers rule, Sorcerers and Exalted Sorcerers, Infernal Masters, Zangor units and Spawn all get a 5+ invul save, a 5+ save against mortal wounds, and a pre-game move of up to 6 inches. The 5+ invul is something that the Zangors would have had already, but it's actually really quite nice on the Chaos Spawn, which don't usually have a save. The 5+ save against mortal wounds is kind of helpful in current 40k with how many of them there are, and the pre-game move is perhaps one of the biggest draws to the formation as a whole. It means that you can get your goat bird people into the midfield a fair bit easier, and hopefully gain a decent positioning advantage on the enemy. Otherwise, there's a couple of other minor boosts, Zangor Shamans get +1 Cabal points if they're within 6-inch range of a bunch of Zangors. If the units combined within 6 inches have 15 or more Zangor models, then you get that extra point. Kind of handy and might make up the deficit if you are bringing a few more Shamans along. And Zangor units also gain Core, but they still don't have the Great Cult keyword, which still means that they can't access a whole bunch of buffs that the Core buff would give to them. Say for example, they can't get the reroll hit rolls of 1 from an Exalted Sorcerer. Overall, out of that list, I feel like the pre-game move and the save against mortal wounds are the biggest benefits, but as I said, I do feel like you're giving up a crazy amount of options within the codex, and you're only really going to be playing with a few units. After you remove all the stuff that's banned, you're basically looking at the HQ choices who are going to be casting a bit worse, the Zangor Shamans, Enlightened and main Zangor squads, Chaos Spawn and Mutalith Vortex Beasts, and Rubric Marines and Scarab Occult Terminators who are stripped of their invul saves and again don't get the +1 to cast. Let's take a look through the other options of the pact though. To be fair, their Warlord trait, Relic and Kabbalistic Ritual all are pretty decent. The Warlord trait is Manipulator of Reality. After you've done your pre-game moves, you can redeploy 3 Zangor units or put them in Strategic Reserve. It does mean that if you're doing that, then you can't get them into the midfield, so it's a bit less powerful than if you'd moved them across the board and then were able to pre-game move them into the midfield. But still, that is going to add a lot of flexibility to deployment, and maybe could even be done to like overload a flank and put a lot more units than your opponent can handle on one objective. The relic I do like quite a lot is the Diamond of Distortion. That one's a command phase buff that automatically goes off, giving you a 4+ invul either to Zangor or Chaos Spawn units. You do already have access to a 4+ invul on a unit via Weaver of Fates, but I'd argue that this one might be even more powerful than that. Just having this automatically go off on one of these units in the command phase is pretty handy. It means that you could have 2 very tanky units of Spawn with a 4+ invul, or make 2 aggressive Zangor units extra hardy. The Kabbalistic Ritual, which costs 6 points, is called the Bray Change. You use this before you use a Psychic test, and you have to be casting a Blessing or Malediction. You roll the test on a 3d6, so it's really quite likely to go off, so it could be good for one of your more important spells. But the nice bit is that if you roll a 10 or more, then you get to regenerate D3 Zangor Enlightened in a unit within 9 inches, or 2d3 regular Zangors. Along with one of the stratagems that we'll mention in a second, it does seem that there's going to be a few ways to regenerate Zangors, so I guess your ideal world would be that your opponent manages to kill a bunch of them, but not actually wipe out the entire unit, so you can do some regeneration shenanigans. All of these do seem pretty useful though. I think they compete well with the other options in the codex. Finally, we come to those stratagems. The first one's Reality Unbound for Enlightened. They get an extra AP -2 better when they're shooting or fighting. Usually their attacks are made at a fairly weedy AP of -1, so this does admittedly help them out quite a bit. It means that a small unit could maybe fairly reliably remove a small unit of Space Marines in melee perhaps, or actually make them some moderately annoying snipers with the Fatecaster Greatbows, which are a little bit lackluster for sniping at the moment. I'm still not sure that this alone is really going to make Zangor Enlightened into a real good damage dealer unit though. Could just maybe add a bit of an extra sting in the tail to a unit that's moving around doing utility things. Next up for 1 CP we have Zangor Onslaught. This allows Bray units to pile in and consolidate an extra 3 inches. Kind of situational, but this one's always handy to have in a pinch. Occasionally that extra 3-inch movement will be what you need to tie up an enemy unit or jump on an objective. In that case the 1 command point is usually going to be useful. For 2 CP we have the other option for regenerating Zangors. This one's Blessed Transmutations. In the command phase you select 1 Psyker, and you revive Zangors in units within 6 inches. If it's an Enlightened squad, you revive 1 Enlightened, or if it's a Zangor unit, then you revive D3+1 Zangors. This one's potentially quite powerful in the command phase, in a similar sort of way to the Death Guard's regeneration of Poxwalkers. That can be handy again for sneaking onto objectives, as it allows you to regenerate models before the objective is scored. Otherwise, just in theory, you could actually be regenerating quite a lot of Zangors if your opponent for some reason shoots a lot of Zangor units and injures them, but doesn't actually fully wipe any. If for some reason that happens, then I guess it could be handy enough. Next up for 1 CP we have Gift of Change, quite a fun one-way kill a character in the Psychic phase, and you immediately get to set up a new Chaos Spawn model within 6 inches of that. Thankfully the Chaos Spawn model doesn't cost reinforcement points, which means that it might actually get used. You only get to use it once per game, but just for the sheer fun factor of just throwing down a random spawn that you've transfigured your opponent's hero into, I think that's quite a nice one, and could give the enemy army an annoying chaff unit to remove, when they might want to go after the rest of your army and not be distracted by an annoying spawn. For 2 CP we have Twisted Mirage. This one allows a psychic character to basically run away when he's charged. If your opponent declares the character as a charged target, they can move 6 inches, and then your opponent can declare new charged targets if they need to. Potentially this could make characters unchargeable if the charge is at least somewhat long. Your opponent won't be able to charge them out of deep strike, which is quite nice, though if they do manage to get up close, then it's not going to save them. These move on charge stratagems are again kind of situational, but really powerful if they are likely to make the difference between the opponent getting in and killing your character, or them getting away completely scot-free. Next, and another kind of fun one, is Warpmeld Spawn. 1 command point to upgrade a spawn unit prior to the game, and they get +1 strength and +1 toughness, taking them up to 6 of each. Particularly in combination with the 5+ invul save, this really does make the units that spawn into really quite a threatening and tough little unit for just 115 points. 20 wounds at toughness 6 and a 5+ invul is really hard to chew through for that kind of cost, and they are fairly threatening in melee as well with their damage to attacks. I feel perhaps the spawn might have done better out of this whole formation than the Zangors have, arguably. Finally we have Ephemeral Existence. This one's a 1 command point 1 to make a Zangor unit essentially warp through walls. They can move, advance, charge or fall back through enemy models and terrain horizontally. A bit niche for the infantry ones maybe, and certainly the fly ones in the movement phase. They'll be able to go straight through a lot of terrains such as ruined walls for example. Maybe a bit more helpful for bypassing enemy models if it makes a big deal, and it means that you're going to struggle to actually wrap and trap any sort of Zangor unit, as they can just warp straight through you if they want to fall back. Again, useful to have around, though again I think it's going to be quite niche and situational when it comes up. Between these, I do think it gives a genuine buff to a Zangor heavy army. There's several situational ones that won't be used that often, but when they come up they could be powerful. I quite like the fun turn a character into a spawn one, and the Warpmeld Spawn one means that you could potentially be running several units of big spawn with extra strength and toughness, and a lot more of a scary prospect on the field. Overall though, I am going to predict that this one isn't going to be the new competitive face of Thousand Suns by any stretch. Maybe a bit more of a fun and fluffy formation to make Zangors a bit more worth it, and actually give you the option to field an entire army of them if that was the way that you really wanted to go down and you weren't the biggest fan of rubrics or scarabs. Probably the biggest issue with it is that it still doesn't make Zangor units that much more tough or more dangerous. It definitely gives them a lot of utility, but maybe just doesn't really get over the fact that a standard Zangor for 7 points, just hitting with a couple of strength 4 attacks at AP -1 isn't really all that great for the cost. Several of the options are very usable, so if you wanted to run a big horde like that, it doesn't seem the worst. I think it is a bit of a shame though that they made all the restrictions quite so punishing. It means that you can't really go halfway and just have a very heavy Zangor army and take very little of the other options. You're basically locked out of a whole load of choices that you might have in your army, and have to ditch a whole load of good things and leave them completely at home if you want this army to function. Anyway though, let me know what you think. Could an angry horde of pre-game moving bird boys be somewhat good in 40k? Or are Thousand Suns going to remain a very much rubric and scarab occult party? If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming. I do tend to post new things just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.